If you think you've dealt with an insufferable neighbor, wait until you meet Karen from my HOA. She decided that my mere existence was a problem for the harmony of the neighborhood. But instead of confronting me directly, this woman had the audacity to release rats into my house. Yes, rats. And then call the health department claiming that I was creating a dangerous infestation. As if that wasn't enough, she even tried to mobilize the neighbors to expel me from the community, as if I were some kind of criminal. The problem? I have footage that proves otherwise. And this Karen has no idea what's about to happen. Do you know when you feel that your life is going too well, and the universe decides to play tricks on you? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I had finally bought my dream house, a quiet little place in a decent neighborhood, without too many problems, no nosy neighbors, or so I thought. The first week was wonderful. I spent the days organizing my things, getting my life in order, and even got to know some of the neighbors. Everything seemed normal, until one neighbor in particular started to catch my eye. She lived 2 houses to the left of mine and had that typical air of the boss, always with that look of superiority, walking as if the ground was made of gold, and all the other mortals around her were just walking obstacles in her routine of spreading arrogance around the world. At first, I tried to ignore it. I thought maybe it was just someone weird, but harmless. But then the signs began. First, there were the judgmental looks. I'd go out to work, and there she'd be, arms crossed, watching every step I took, as if she were compiling a detailed dossier on my routine. Then came the accidents. A fence that mysteriously came loose and fell on my garden, the lid of my garbage can that disappeared out of nowhere, and, strangest of all, footprints appearing on my balcony, as if someone had taken a late-night stroll there. But I, in my innocence, thought it was all just my paranoia, until the rats started to appear. On the first day, I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. I thought it was just a misplaced shopping bag falling off the worktop, but when I got there, I saw something that made my stomach turn. A fat rat, sitting in the middle of the floor, looking at me as if I had invaded his house, and not the other way around. I screamed, obviously. I'm not exactly a person who gets on well with thermos-sized rodents. I called an exterminator the next day. He took a look and said it looked like an isolated case, but that I should keep an eye out. All right, I did. But then came the second rat, and the third, and the next thing I knew, I was living in the movie Ratatouille, only without the cute side of the story. I started to investigate. Rats don't just spring out of nowhere, do they? They need a reason to appear. I searched every corner of the house, checking for cracks, holes, possible entry points. Nothing. It was as if the bugs were simply appearing from beyond. And then, one night, I had the bright idea of checking the security cameras I had installed as soon as I moved in. I took out my cell phone, opened the app, and started reviewing the recordings. Everything seemed normal, until I saw it. That woman. At 3 in the morning, there she was, standing in the middle of my yard, holding a box. At first, I thought, what the hell is this crazy woman doing in my yard in the middle of the night? But before I could formulate a theory, she opened the lid of the box and, like a cartoon villain, dumped a load of rats straight onto my property. I didn't know whether to laugh or freak out. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a sick prank. This was psychopathic. And to make matters worse, the next day, very early in the morning, health surveillance showed up at my door, as if it was all part of a meticulously calculated plan. "We've received a complaint about a rat infestation on your property," said the inspector, holding a clipboard and looking at me as if I were responsible for the Black Plague. Ah, but I was going to sort it out. If this woman wanted war, then war she would have. If there's one thing that annoys me deeply, it's people who play dirty. And this woman, not only did she play dirty, she basically threw a bunch of rats into my house and tried to pretend she had nothing to do with it. The level of scoundrelry here was so high that I didn't know whether to get angry or clap my hands for the audacity. So, there I was, on my doorstep, staring at a health inspector holding a clipboard, looking at me as if I were a high-risk environmental criminal. "Anonymous tip-off," he said, adjusting his glasses and measuring me from head to toe as if I were the worst human being in the neighborhood. "Oh, right, an anonymous tip, as if I didn't already know exactly who the author of this joke was. Are you aware that your property is infested by rats?" the inspector asked, jotting something down on his clipboard, probably possible reincarnation of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. "Look, I'm aware that a certain madwoman dumped these rats in my yard at dawn, if that counts," I replied, crossing my arms. He gave me that look typical of a bureaucrat who has heard all the lame excuses in the world and thinks I'm just making up a story to get out of a fine. "Do you have proof of this?" I resisted the urge to take out my cell phone and rub the recordings in his face. I took a deep breath because I knew that exploding in anger would only screw me up even more. "I have security cameras," I said with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I can show you now if you like." The inspector hesitated for a second. I don't think he was expecting that. He followed me into the room while I took out my cell phone and pulled up the recording. There it was, in high definition, dumping rats on my property like confetti at carnival. When the recording finished, the inspector let out a tired sigh and rubbed his face. "That's unusual. Unusual. My friend, that's the stuff of completely unhinged people." He looked at me with the face of someone who definitely didn't earn enough to deal with this kind of thing, and started writing something down on his clipboard. "Well, that changes the situation a bit. If it's confirmed that this lady did it intentionally, responsibility for the infestation can be redirected." "Great," I said, already imagining the look on her face when she received an unfriendly visit from health surveillance. The inspector made me sign a form and promised to take the case forward. But I knew that bureaucracy was a slow process, and in the meantime, I still had to deal with the disgrace of the rats. And, as if my day wasn't bad enough, a few hours later I received an email from the HOA, the Residents Association. Yes, because this neighborhood also had that little group of people with too much time on their hands and an uncontrollable desire to meddle in other people's lives. The email, written in a formal tone, said something like, "Dear resident, we have received multiple complaints about the current condition of your property. Rats have been spotted in the vicinity, and we therefore request that you arrange for the problem to be eliminated immediately. Otherwise, action may be taken to preserve the quality of the neighborhood." Translation: "Turn around, or we'll find a way to throw you out." I wanted to laugh so as not to freak out. So the bastard spreads rats in my house, calls health surveillance, and now wants to use it against me to screw me over with the HOA? The level of scoundrelry was so absurd that I almost respected it. Almost. If she wanted to play dirty, then I was going to show her that I could play too. The first thing I did was print out some copies of the security camera footage, where she appeared in the middle of the night dumping rats in my yard. Then I prepared a nice email reply to the HOA, attaching the photos and explaining the situation. Something along the lines of, "Dear all, I would like to clarify that the rat situation on my property was intentionally generated by a resident of the community, as evidenced by the attached images. I am waiting for action to be taken as to who is really to blame for this situation. Otherwise, I will have to take this case to higher authorities and the local media." I sent it and waited. And, as expected, the next day, the woman was already at my door. She didn't look happy at all. The artificial smile she always wore had disappeared, and in its place was an expression of pure indignation. "So now you're accusing me of crimes? Is that it?" She crossed her arms, trying to look offended. "I'm not accusing you of anything." I shrugged. "The security cameras that accused me of you being a lunatic who dumps rats in other people's houses in the middle of the night." She snorted, clearly disconcerted, but trying to hold her pose. "That's a misunderstanding." "Then great. Explain this misunderstanding to the HOA and health surveillance, because it seems that now everyone is very interested in the subject." The color disappeared from her face for a second. She knew things were bad, but I also knew that people like her don't give up easily, and that was just the beginning. If there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that slackers never accept when they're caught red-handed. And this woman? Oh, she was the perfect example. Even with proof, even with the cameras showing her antics, the creature still tried to play the victim. After our little chat on my doorstep, she disappeared for a few days. And honestly, I almost thought I'd won. But, as they say, the enemy only retreats to strike harder. And I didn't have to wait long for the next blow. On Saturday morning, when I went out to get the newspaper, yes, I'm one of the few people who still reads the paper, I noticed something strange on my fence. A laminated piece of paper attached with staples. It was a notice from the HOA. Due to the persistent issue of rodent infestation on your property, this neighborhood council has been forced to take appropriate action. As the situation directly impacts the community's quality of life, we are filing a petition to consider removing the resident in question if the situation is not resolved within 15 days. I had to read that 3 times to believe it. You mean the damn thing threw rats in my house? I proved it was her. And now it was me they were trying to evict? I swear it took me a whole minute to absorb the sheer bollocks. I went home, turned on my computer, and went straight to the neighborhood Facebook group. Yes, because these places always have one of those groups where people gossip, complain about garbage on the sidewalk, and post pictures of lost cats. And I already had a plan. I posted the images from the security camera. Yes, all of them, unedited, uncensored, without hiding her face. And along with the images, I wrote, "For those of you who are receiving notifications about the rat infestation on my property, here is some interesting evidence about how this infestation started. Maybe the HOA should focus on solving this real problem instead of trying to flush out victims of sabotage." I sent it and closed the laptop. Now all I had to do was wait. And, my God, how little I waited. The post exploded. In the first 10 minutes, it already had more than 20 comments. Neighbors shocked, indignant, some laughing at the situation. And of course, there were her defenders, those people who probably believe that the earth is flat and that mango milk is bad for you. But the best thing? Someone tagged the HOA president himself. A few hours later, a new email from the HOA appeared in my inbox. And this time, the tone was completely different. "Dear resident, we have received new information about the situation involving your property and would like to clarify that the HOA does not endorse harmful actions against members of the community. An emergency meeting will be held to discuss the recent findings. You are invited to attend." Oops! Now everyone was worried. Of course I went. And of course, she was there too. The meeting took place at the home of the president of the HOA, who, to my surprise, wasn't as much of an idiot as I'd imagined. He welcomed me with a tense handshake and a look like he wanted to be doing something else instead of mediating this circus. His wife was sitting on the sofa, arms crossed, looking like she'd just sucked a sour lemon. The meeting began with that official blah blah blah, talking about neighborhood harmony and maintaining quality of life. But I wasn't there for rehearsed speeches. When I was finally given the floor, I got straight to the point. "You know that the infestation was caused by this woman here, right?" I pointed at her. "There's a video, there's a photo, there's even a report from the health department, which has already been here and knows that this was sabotage." The president sniffed, uncomfortable. "Yes, we're aware of the images." "Good," I interrupted. "Then explain to me why I still get notifications threatening to kick me out of the neighborhood?" Silence. That's when she decided to open her mouth. "I don't know why you're making all this fuss," she said, forcing a smile. "It was all a big misunderstanding. I was just trying to help solve a problem that already existed. If you'd dealt with it earlier, none of this would have happened." My blood boiled. "Oh, right." I let out a sarcastic laugh. "So your idea of help was to dump rats in my house in the middle of the night? Do you happen to work in pest control? And I didn't know?" She turned red. The HOA president looked at her, then at me, clearly trying to decide which side to take. That's when another neighbor, a man in his 60s who until then had kept quiet, decided to speak up. I've lived here for over 20 years, and we've never had a problem with rats until now. I think it's kind of obvious who caused all this. Bingo. Other voices began to join in, some defending her, of course, but the majority were with me. And not because they liked me, I was new there, but because nobody likes the idea of a crazy person throwing rats into other people's houses and calling the health authorities afterwards. The president took a deep breath and closed the folder of documents. Given what has been presented, the HOA cannot uphold the notice of removal against you. Hallelujah. Besides, he continued, looking at her, we're going to open an investigation into your conduct. She widened her eyes. Investigation? Yes, he confirmed, closing his face. If it is proven that your actions have directly harmed a resident of the community, disciplinary measures will be taken. I swear I saw a muscle twitch at the corner of her mouth. I left the meeting with a slight sense of victory, but I knew it wasn't over yet. This woman was not going to swallow this defeat easily, and I was right. Because the next morning, when I went out to get my newspaper, I found an anonymous envelope stuck to my door. Inside was a note with letters cut out of magazines. You may have won this one, but I never lose. It was official. This fight was far from over. I knew it wasn't over yet. When you're dealing with someone who doesn't know how to lose, the only thing you can be sure of is that they'll always find a way to get deeper into the mud. And this woman? Oh, she was willing to dig until she found oil. The anonymous note that appeared on my doorstep didn't scare me. In fact, it made me laugh. It was so dramatic, so much out of a bad movie, that I could almost picture her sitting at the kitchen table, cutting words out of a magazine with a concentrated psycho face. But laughing was one thing. Underestimating? Quite another. I spent the next few days waiting for her next move, and lo and behold, when it came, it was even more creative than I had imagined. The first surprise. It all started on Thursday morning. I was leaving for work when I noticed something strange in my garage. My car was covered in stickers. Yes, stickers. But not just any kind of stickers. They were labels, the kind you see in supermarkets. Only, instead of normal prices, they all had aggressive messages. Unwelcome visitor. Change required. It was as if someone had gone into a store, printed out a dozen personalized labels, and spent the night sticking them to my car. I stared at it for a moment, trying to decide whether I was angry or just found it hilarious. In the end, I opted for a mixture of both. I spent 20 minutes ripping stickers off the bodywork before leaving for work. But as I drove, I realized that this wasn't just some act of vandalism. It was a message. She wanted to make it clear that she wasn't going to back down, that the war was still on. And honestly, it only made me want to stomp on her more. The second surprise. The next day, I received an email. This time, it wasn't from the HOA, but from a lawyer. Dear, we have been informed that your conduct in the neighborhood has caused discomfort and threatened the safety of one of our clients. We are formally notifying you of possible legal action should your intimidating behavior continue. I had to read that twice to believe it. She was suing me? For heaven's sake! I did a quick search on the lawyer's name and discovered that he specialized in small claims, the kind of professional who will take on any case as long as the client pays up front. In other words, this wasn't a real case. It was an attempt to scare me. But best of all, attached to the email was a document containing the evidence she had gathered against me. And guess what? They were screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group. She was claiming that I had tarnished her image publicly, and that this was affecting her emotionally. Ah, poor thing. The woman spreads rats in my house, tries to kick me out of the neighborhood, and then wants to play the victim because everyone found out what she did. The hypocrisy was so great that I could almost smell it through the monitor. I knew exactly how to respond. I sent a short, direct email. Dear lawyer, I recommend that your client share the same concern for her own reputation when she is being investigated by the HOA and health surveillance. All the information disclosed was based on concrete evidence, available for any necessary legal process. Should your client choose to pursue this action, I will be more than happy to present further evidence in court. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, I sent it and leaned back in my chair, waiting for the reaction, and it came quickly. The third surprise. The next morning, while I was having my coffee on the balcony, I saw a black car parked in front of my house. Guess who got out? She did. Yes, the woman had the audacity to come to my door, probably thinking she was going to intimidate me with her majestic presence as head of the bankrupt HOA. I crossed my arms and waited. She marched right up to me, looking like a snake about to strike. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice so sweet it almost gave me cavities. "Of course," I replied. "But I warn you, there's a camera right over there." I pointed to the security camera above the door. She twisted her mouth, but didn't back down. "I think this situation has gone far enough," she said, as if I were to blame for everything. "It's in nobody's interest for this to turn into open warfare." "That's funny," I said, pretending to think. "Because that's exactly what you tried to do when you threw rats into my house." She snorted. "I told you it was a misunderstanding." "Oh, right. You tripped, the box of rats fell out of your hand, and by coincidence, they ended up right in my yard." "Got it." She gave me a deadly look. "I just want to wrap this up, without any more fuss." Translation: she realized she wasn't going to win and was trying to save her own skin. "Fine," I replied. "You can start by dropping any legal charges against me. Then you can apologize publicly in the neighborhood group. And finally, you can pay for the damage you've caused to my house." She looked at me as if I'd just asked for a kidney. "You're crazy if you think I'm going to do all that." "Then we're clear," I said, smiling. "Good luck in court." I turned my back and went inside, leaving her snorting with hatred on my balcony. At that moment, I knew she had lost, because people like her only know how to play when they're in control. But when they lose the advantage, they get desperate, and I couldn't wait to see what she was going to try now. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole story, it's that some people don't know when to stop. And this woman? Well, not only did she not know how to stop, she seemed determined to dig her own hole to the center of the earth. After our last conversation, where I made it very clear that I wasn't going to fall for the "let's end this in peace" theatrics without her paying for what she'd done, I thought that maybe she'd finally understand that she'd lost. But, once again, I underestimated the level of madness and cluelessness of this creature. The next morning, I woke up to a new notification on my cell phone, an email from the HOA calling for a special emergency meeting. Ah, here we go again. Of course I went. And of course, when I got there, I realized exactly what was going on. The meeting had been hastily set up, and as soon as I entered the HOA president's house, I saw the woman sitting on the sofa, trying to look like the wronged victim of a great conspiracy against her hallowed reputation. Around them, a few residents were talking in low tones, clearly not knowing which side to take. The president sniffed and looked at me as soon as I sat down. "We called you here to discuss recent events and try to find a solution that will prevent further conflict in the neighborhood." Translation: she came crying to us, and now we're trying to see if we can find a compromise before this becomes an even bigger problem. I crossed my arms and waited. The woman was the first to speak. "I really don't know why this is happening to me," she began, sighing dramatically. "I just tried to be part of the community, to keep order, and now I'm being attacked from all sides." I almost laughed. "Attacked?" I asked, tilting my head. "That's funny, because as far as I know, you're the one who threw rats into other people's houses." She gave me a venomous look. "I told you it was a misunderstanding, but you chose to slander me publicly. You exposed me in the neighborhood group, and now my family is suffering the consequences." "Oh, you poor thing," I replied, full of sarcasm. "If your family is suffering, it's because you caused it. And honestly, I don't care." The president coughed, clearly uncomfortable with the growing aggressiveness of the conversation. The point is that we need to find a solution. And based on the evidence presented earlier, it's clear that you, he looked at her, choosing his words carefully, acted inappropriately. However, we believe that we may, but I'm not that kind of person. I'm not interested in an apology, I said, straight to the point. She tried to screw me over in every way possible. She spread rats in my house, called the health authorities, tried to evict me, vandalized my car, and even invented a ridiculous lawsuit against me. So explain to me why I should just accept a friendly settlement now. The room fell silent. The woman, who clearly thought she was going to be able to bend me over with this little theater, was now getting visibly nervous. She tried to laugh, but it came out more like a forced squeak. Well, if you want to take it that seriously. Oh, I will. I've even consulted a lawyer, too. And unlike yours, mine works with serious cases. That was the last straw. Her face turned red with anger. You're destroying my reputation. I raised my eyebrows. You did it yourself, girlfriend. I just pressed publish. That's when it became a complete mess. She suddenly stood up from her chair, knocking over a cup of coffee on the coffee table. She started shouting, saying that this was a witch hunt, that this neighborhood didn't deserve someone like her, and that everyone was ungrateful for not recognizing how much she had already done for the community. And then, out of nowhere, she unleashed the best line of the night. I resign from the HOA. I swear on all that is holy that the entire room was silent for 3 full seconds. And then someone on the other side of the room muttered, "But nobody elected you." That's when I couldn't stand it and burst out laughing. The final blow came from the HOA president himself, who, seeing that the woman was completely out of control, decided to put an end to the antics once and for all. We are initiating a formal process to remove her from the association and review her actions over the past few months. If it is proven that there has been intentional harmful conduct against any resident, legal action may be taken. The woman's eyes widened. Legal action? The president sighed, clearly fed up. The HOA cannot prevent individual lawsuits against you, but it can decide whether to continue allowing your active participation in the community. And, considering everything we already know, he closed the folder tightly. It doesn't look promising for your side. That's when she realized she'd lost, totally. The queen of the HOA had fallen from her throne, and there was nothing more she could do to reverse it. The next day, I received another email. This time, it wasn't a threat, but a formal warning. She was officially banned from the HOA and under investigation by the association itself for possible harmful conduct against residents. And as icing on the cake, she withdrew the ridiculous lawsuit she tried to file against me. The final revenge. A few weeks later, I noticed a strange movement at her house. Moving trucks. I watched from my window as furniture was loaded, boxes were stacked, and eventually she herself left the house, this time without her usual arrogance. She was leaving. I could have sworn that at one point our gazes met, and, just for a second, I saw something different on her face. Maybe regret, maybe just anger at having lost. But you know what? It didn't matter. My neighborhood was finally free of the most unbearable plague of all. And, for the first time since I moved here, I slept soundly. And if you liked this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more stories like this.